All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Explorer Classroom event. My name is Geographic from National Geographic, and I will be your host for today. This month on Explorer Classroom, we've been focused on extreme environments. So we've heard from deep sea explorers, volcano experts. We've learned about rivers that boil. We've met storm chasers who are in search of the most extreme weather. And today we're connecting with explorers who just got back from the 2019 National Geographic Rolex expedition to Mount Everest as part of our Perpetual Planet Partnership. So the expedition was to a very extreme place, Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, 8,848 meters above sea level. And we're so excited to be joined today by Aurora and Alex, who were on the expedition, probably got to spend some time at base camp. I have no doubt they have some cool stories, some images to share with us from the expedition. So Alex and Aurora, it's so exciting to have you joining us live today. We've got an awesome group of classrooms from right across North America, Canada, and the US. They're tuning in on camera. They're live on YouTube. We're excited to get to know the two of you a little better.
All right, sounds good. Aurora, you want to start?
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I see some waving hands. So great to meet you all, and we're really excited to be able to tell you a little bit about our recent expedition. So Alex and I right now are wearing some of the equipment that we wore on Mount Everest, and we're gonna take it off because it's really hot in here. So we're inside now in an office space, so we don't need this much, thick down outer clothes for our meeting today with you guys. And we prepared a little presentation, and we're going to show you some pictures and some of the results from our expedition. And I'm going to start that right now, and you'll come back to us in just a minute. Okay. So a little bit about me. My name's Aurora, and I'm originally from Maine, and I have always been an explorer. I always loved rocks and going outside. This is my trusty assistant, my older brother. We went on camping adventures, and we went sledding off our house and had a really great time exploring all around Maine. Then, of course, I went to school like you all are in school. For 13 years, I was a student of classrooms just like you are, so you're in middle school. Once I graduated high school, I went to college for 4 years. Then I went to a master's degree program for 2 years, and then I went to graduate school again to become a doctor of geology. So that's an awful lot of time in class, which I'm sure maybe doesn't sound that fun to you all now, but when you find something you're really, really interested in, you might find that you enjoy staying in school quite a bit longer than average. And my subject that I was so interested in and continue to work on is climate change. So my background is understanding how climate changed in the past and how it might affect us in the future. And one of the things I like to always tell groups, especially of students, is that no matter who you are, climate change is going to affect you in some way. It might change agriculture, it might change how much water you have, sea level rise, and for you as students, it's going to change your lives quite a lot because you're going to be on this planet an awfully long time. So it's an important thing for us to understand and to predict how climate change will affect in the future as you all grow up. One of the important things about climate change to always keep in mind is that it's not going to affect everyone equally. And in fact, people in poor communities, poorer countries are the least able to cope with climate change. And that helps us kind of set the frame for this expedition that we just returned from. So Alex and I helped to set up the Everest expedition that went in April, May, and June of 2019. And the purpose of this expedition was to scientifically understand how climate is changing, particularly in one area of the world, which is high mountain Asia, also known as the Himalaya. This is where Mount Everest is located. Mount Everest sits on the border between China and Nepal. So you can see it here on a map. Nepal is between China and India. So right in between these really large countries, you have a huge group of mountains, this long chain of mountains called the Himalaya or Himalaya. And what is so important about this area is that there are glaciers, which are basically compacted snow up in the high mountains that stay cold enough that they can keep water stored up there as snow for many, many years. As climate is changing and temperatures are warming, some of that snow is melting faster than previously. And there's about 1/5 of all of the people in the world who actually rely on the water from the high Himalaya to grow their crops, to drink, to do industry for all of their water needs. Just like how we turn on the faucet and have water come out, people all around the world need their water too. So this is a particularly important area to understand water use and how the water is going to change as climate changes. So here's a quick picture of the National Geographic Everest expedition. And Alex, do you want to tell us a little bit about when this picture was taken?
Sure. This picture was taken pretty soon after our group arrived at Everest Base Camp. So this is the group at Everest Base Camp. You can see me with a hat and glasses on my hat in the back row. Aurora's sitting down in the front row. And we got a visit from Aurora and our chief scientist, Jonathan Bailey. They actually flew to Everest Base Camp on a helicopter, which is one of the ways to get to base camp. Many of the rest of us had taken about 9 days to hike up to base camp. So base camp actually sees quite a bit of helicopter traffic for the different expeditions. So our expedition convened at base camp, and that was the beginning of about 7 weeks of base camp work for our science team.
Now, Alex, why am I sitting down here?
So Aurora's sitting down because the air is very different at base camp. Up at a higher elevation, your body's able to access much less oxygen. So Aurora had not had time to acclimatize like many of the rest of us. So she was feeling very tired and very weak because she hadn't acclimatized to the high altitude yet. So she needed to leave very soon after this picture to go back to Kathmandu at a lower elevation.
So we're right here at 5,300 meters, or how many feet?
That's
is that?
about 17,500 feet.
So pretty darn high. And yeah, I was running out of oxygen very quickly. So part of our expedition was to understand how climate changed in the past. We took boats out onto what's called a glacial lake. This really pretty blue is the color of a lake when it's filled with glacial sediments. So we took boats out in order to examine what's living there and how it changes through time. We drilled an ice core, and you're going to hear about each of these parts of the science in the rest of this week. All of our teams are calling in to do Explorer Classrooms and tell you about their individual work. But this is Mario taking an ice core in order to determine how climate was changing. And one of our other activities was setting up the world's highest weather station. So this is our team, all dressed in yellow. This is at the balconies. So they're 8,400 meters above sea level, almost to the tippy top of Mount Everest. And this weather station is really important because it provides the information that will let us know how quickly glaciers are melting. It's the highest in the world. We set up, in fact, 2 or 3 of the highest weather stations in the world during this expedition. And Alex and I are not in this photo, but I think you'll be talking to the guy in the middle later this week. So Alex, what were you doing on the expedition?
So my work on the expedition was to lead the mapping team, and our goal was to map the Khumbu Glacier, which is the glacier on the south side of Mount Everest, where all the climbing groups go up from the south. And we wanted to get a picture of what the glacier looks like today so we can compare it to past pictures of the glacier and to future pictures of the glacier so we can better understand how the glacier is changing. And this is a glacier that is about 14 miles long and covers 65 square kilometers. So it's a huge glacier, and our job was to map it. The picture here shows me setting up a survey base station so we can know exactly where in space, latitude and longitude and elevation, all of our data is being collected. And I want to show you a short video, if I can. There we go. Got some help from Aurora. So we used drones and helicopters as the way for us to take pictures and videos of the glacier and of base camp. So this is a picture, this is a video from a drone over base camp. And you can see how complicated base camp is to map. We mapped all the tents and all the rocks and all the glacier at base camp. There's about 1,200 people at base camp in the spring climbing season, and we were part of that group at base camp. I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what it's like to be in this region of Nepal. There, at lower elevations, are many villages. This is one of the Sherpa villages called Namche Bazar. And when you're going up to base camp, you can use helicopters to transport, but you also use yaks. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what a yak train looks like. Is it gonna play for us? There we go. So these yaks are carrying loads up to base camp for us, food and other supplies. And of course, the young yak has to go along because he needs to stay with his mom.
And learn the route.
And learn the route to base camp. So this is a picture of me with one of the base camp dogs that would come to visit us at base camp, doing some of my mapping work. And I want to give you just a little idea of what the data will look like as we put together all this information about base camp. And so this is a computer model based on the data we collected that allows us to map base camp in 3 dimensions in a computer environment. And we can measure the rocks and the ice, and we can see where all the tents are. So a little bit more of what life is like at base camp when you're doing this work. We had to keep an eye out for things that were happening in our environment. Things such as avalanches coming off the mountain. And you can see how active this high mountain environment is. We have day-to-day changes in the environment. And of course, we're trying to keep track of the yearly and even decadal changes in all the ice and snow. But we were able to see quite a few of these, which were really concerning when you're doing your work. I wanted to finish with a little bit of video that shows what it's like to be working on steep ice. And we had to train with our Sherpa.
All right, Tom.
With our Sherpa team. So here's one of our scientists, Tom Matthews, learning how to climb up the ice in an area where we were practicing. But this is the same sort of work he had to do to get all the way up to the balcony where you saw they installed the weather station. So can we switch back to live video?
Yeah.
So if we have a couple minutes, Joe, I wanted to show a little bit of the equipment we use to work on the mountain. Do we have time for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna reach into my bag here. One of the most important things that you have when you're in the high mountains is really good boots. And so we have these boots that are super insulated for climbing on mountains at a very high elevation and very cold temperatures. You wanna hold that one, Aurora? And some of you may know that when you want to climb on ice, you need to have very sharp points on your boots. And so you attach the crampons to the boots so that you can then climb up the ice. And especially those of you in Alaska may know more about this. There's lots of ice and snow climbs in Alaska. So we have the boots with the crampons, and then in your hand, you have to have something that you can stick into the ice to keep your balance. And that's where one of these comes in really handy. So every climber had an ice axe, and they had boots with crampons so that they could go up and down the ice safely. And of course, we used ropes for safety cords so that people, if they slipped, would be caught by the ropes. And of course, in our work, we were having to work with all this climbing equipment plus our scientific equipment. So we had survey devices, we had ice core drills. So it was a lot of hard work in a very difficult environment. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor. We were there to study climate change in a high mountain environment, and we had to work under very challenging conditions.
All right, very cool. Alex and Aurora, it looks like you had an awesome experience out at Everest. And I have a feeling that our classrooms are going to have a lot of questions about it. So I think we should start meeting them and let's see what questions they have. So I do want to give a shout out to the classrooms who are tuning in live via YouTube. You can see we have a good group joining there. So make sure you send us in some questions there, introduce yourselves. And in fact, a couple classes already have. We've got grade 4-5s in Regina, Saskatchewan, up here in Canada, 7th graders in Aurora, Illinois, who are hanging out with us. Yeah, we've got Dryden, Ontario, Mrs. Schmidt's class is hanging out with us. Mr. Richards' group in Hoover, Alabama. So lots of cool classrooms. Introduce yourselves and send us in those questions. Let's go to a live classroom. So let's start off. Let's go to Mrs. Coburn's group. Grade 6 is hanging out in Idaho. Let me get that microphone turned on. There they are. How are we doing, Idaho?
How are we doing, guys?
Hey.
Hi.
All right, who's up for the question?
Hey, what's your question? What's their question?
How did you guys ever name the dog that was always that came to your camp?
Okay, come here. Come around here.
No, bud, can you come closer to the computer at the back? We didn't hear that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, we're not after that.
Did you guys ever name the dog that went to your camp?
That's a good question. We actually saw lots of dogs in this part of Nepal. They live off of scraps from the various different families and restaurants and things that are around. We didn't name that one in particular, but we did collect a lot of photographs of these dogs. They were very, very friendly. And we're going to make a calendar of all the dogs that we saw in Nepal. So that one didn't have a name, but he was very friendly and he did sit with me a lot during the work I was doing.
All right, the dogs of Nepal. I look forward to that. Maybe you can find it online in the future. Very cool. Mrs. Wedman's group, they are in Kansas. They're 4th graders. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, Kansas?
Emma, why don't you ask a question?
How did you prepare for climbing Mount Everest?
Ooh, that was many, many months of effort. One of the really unique things about this expedition is we weren't just climbing it. We also had a lot of science to do. So we needed to ship all our equipment. We needed to have food. We needed to be in physically good shape for those, especially who were climbing way up high on the mountain. But even people going just to base camp did a lot of athletic training before they went. And we have an amazing logistics director who was responsible for getting all of our equipment there. We had to purchase a lot of special gear, like the jackets and hats you saw, but also shoes and the special climbing equipment. And then we spent a lot of time getting to know our team. We took 46 team members, and then we had support staff of Nepalis of around 80 different members of the team. So all in all, we were 120 people, and we spent a lot of time getting to know everyone and keeping track of the schedules and making sure everyone was safe and happy in order to complete our scientific objectives.
And we had to practice a lot with our team in Nepal. So we worked with high altitude Sherpa climbers, and they had to learn the science and we had to learn the climbing skills. So we spent a whole month just with them working on how to survive and do science in a high mountain environment. And that practice was really important.
Yeah.
All right, very cool. Great question from our class in Kansas. So we're going to go to YouTube, and our class in Regina, Saskatchewan wants to know about the wildlife. Did you see much wildlife on your way there or around base camp as you went up?
Yeah, we actually had 2 different biology teams who will be giving a presentation later in the week, but their aim was to understand all of the different living things that were up on Mount Everest. So from teeny tiny little microbes to pieces of pollen, all the way through large species of shrubs. There were over 150 different types of plants that were identified. There were yaks, there were birds, What else?
The Himalayan vulture, called a grissom, is really impressive. So when I was there in January, where there were fewer climbers, this is when we were practicing, this was before the major expeditions, we saw more wildlife because there were fewer people. And we saw a Himalayan mountain goat called a tar.
Yep.
And we saw footprints of snow leopards. We didn't see snow leopards, but we saw their footprints, which was pretty exciting.
They're very, very rare and really hard to see because they're white, so they blend in with the snow.
All right, very cool. Great question. Keep those coming in online for us.
Joe, if everyone uses iNaturalist, they can also look at all the different species that we found on iNaturalist. If you zoom in on the region.
Very cool. What's the best way they can find it on there?
I think if you type in Mount Everest, it will send you to the project and let you see all the different species that we found.
And of course, iNaturalist lets any student, any amateur scientist and professional scientist add information about species they see in their own neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Let's check here. Any classroom, any students use iNaturalist? You have it on your phones, you use it around your communities? See a couple hands.
Okay.
All right. So check it out if you haven't checked it out before. Mrs. Russett's class is joining us. They are in Ontario, grade 5-6 class. Let's get that microphone turned on. There it is. How are we doing, 5-6s?
How many layers do you wear, like, when you're going there? How many layers, like, do you have?
That's a good question. So when we were at base camp, just working at about 17,000 to 18,000 feet, I think most of the time we had 3 or 4 layers. So you'd have an undershirt, a long sleeve, long underwear shirt, a light jacket, and then a medium jacket. And then at night you'd put on your big puffy down jacket to stay warm because at night it got really cold. And then the higher up you went, the thicker those layers would need to be. So I would say on average, you generally had 3 or 4 layers, but that outer layer had to be really, really thick when you were up at 8,000 meters. Because at 8,000 meters, the temperatures were probably around 20 to 30 below 0 Celsius, which would be 10 below to 20 below Fahrenheit. Very, very cold up high. And the winds could be very strong.
The other thing that's very strong when you're up that high is the sun. So I was actually really surprised when everyone came back down. They all had, really, really tan faces because the sun is so strong when you're up at that elevation. So lots of sunscreen was used. We had to ship up more sunscreen actually because you'd run out pretty soon, pretty quickly.
All right, very cool. Well, I also want to give a shout out to Katie. Katie's from Mrs. Russ's class and she is joining us in the call as well. So I'm just going to turn the mic on just in case they have a question for us, and I want to work that in. If you guys do have a question for Alex and Aurora, your microphone's on.
Sure. You mentioned that the temperatures were as low as minus 20 and 30. What was the warmest temperature that you experienced when you were at Everest?
Okay, so at base camp during the day, on the nice days, it would get as high as 50 degrees Fahrenheit, so well above freezing. And even up at 6,500, almost 7,000 meters up in the protected valley called the Western Coombe, where there was no wind, even up there, it would get up to almost freezing, so about 30 degrees during the day, even very high up. So it's only when you hit the summit ridge and the very high elevations where the wind picks up. But that would be in the middle of the day. And then at night, it would drop 50 or 60 degrees overnight, very quickly, as soon as the sun goes down.
All right, great question. Let's visit another class now. Let's take a little trip to, where do we need to go? There we go. Mrs. Huxley's class, they are joining us from Canada as well. Looks like a grade 5 classroom. Let's get that microphone turned on. There it is. How are we doing, grade 5s?
Good.
Hey guys.
Hi. Do you have to wear oxygen mask when you're up on Everest? Okay.
So Alex said that I flew to base camp in a helicopter and there was very, very little oxygen. So I actually wore an oxygen mask for a little bit since I wasn't used to being just at base camp without oxygen. Everyone who climbed up to base camp, they didn't need oxygen there. But as they got higher and higher and higher, everyone started wearing oxygen. So when you saw the picture of our team setting up the highest weather station, they're at 8,400 meters or 20, how many feet?
About 27,500 feet.
And our whole team was wearing oxygen for that. So it was really hard because they had to maneuver things with their fingers and see really high precision technologic equipment. And think of trying to take apart your computer, but with a big mask on your face where you can't really see anything. But luckily they had enough oxygen and made it back down safely and did a really great job up there, even with the masks on.
And that's one of the big jobs for the Sherpa climbing team, is to make sure that everybody has enough oxygen. And all the climbers have to look out for each other, because even with oxygen, sometimes you get lightheaded and you start thinking, you don't think very straight. And so all the climbers have to look out for each other because of the lack of oxygen, even with some of the oxygen masks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, looking at YouTube, our class from Aurora, Illinois says that they love iNaturalist, and they're also wondering, if you had any free time, what were you doing?
Texting me.
So we were keeping in touch. So when I had free time at base camp, so for my work, and Chris Milburn and I were at base camp for about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks. And we would take a day off about every 5th or 6th day because we were getting very tired just working all around base camp. So some of the things that we would do is we could actually take a bath with a bucket of water. We could actually walk through the camp and talk with other people, and just spend some time relaxing and not working. So trying to catch up on food. It was surprising that you'd think you'd be super hungry all the time, but sometimes you weren't that hungry. So you'd be searching out the best food you could find. We had a really great cook team that prepared the meals for us. So you really use those rest days to recuperate and get ready for some more work.
All right. Well, we talked to some of the geologists this morning, Mary and Vivek, and they said that you guys, actually, the food wasn't too bad. We were expecting you were going to roughing it a little bit, but she let us, on the secret that it was actually pretty good. They had lasagna when they came up and visited. So
yeah, no, base camp food was pretty good. We had a good team that was cooking for us.
All right, awesome. Let's go to Colchester, Connecticut. Grade 6 is hanging out with Mrs. Krenecki.
Hey, I grew up in Connecticut. Yay, Connecticut.
There we go. Looks like their microphone's on. How are we doing, Connecticut?
Hi. I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Can you get a little closer, bud? Yeah.
How did anyone slip or get injured? And how many girls were on the trip?
Both good questions. You want to
Yeah.
tackle those?
So we had about 1/3 of our team was made up of women. We had female leads of the geology team and the biology team, who are professors who happen to be women. And we also brought a lot of graduate students with us on the expedition, including 3 Nepali graduate students who were women, another 6 or so who were men, and then 2 of the US graduate students were women. So all in all, I think we were about 13 women on the expedition. And of course, our expedition leader, our logistics leader, her name is Dr. Sandra Elvin, and she is female as well.
And then as far as staying healthy and worrying about people slipping, as far as I know, nobody slipped and got injured. We actually had a very good record with our Sherpa climbing team, keeping us safe in high elevation work and on the ice. We had all the equipment and we were well trained. Mm-hmm. We did, however, run into a problem of people getting sick at base camp. We had a flu that was going around base camp and people were getting sick. And when you get sick, when you're at 17 or 18,000 feet, your body has a hard time fighting the infection. And so me and several other, and actually, as a matter of fact, most of the team actually went back down to a lower elevation to get better and then come back up to base camp. So health on an expedition is a really serious thing, because if you're sick, you can't do your work.
All right, thanks for that awesome question from Connecticut. Mrs. John's class, they are joining us from Canada as well. They are sixth graders. Let me get their microphone turned on. There it is. Hey, Mrs. John's class, how are you? Oh, Mrs. John, do you mind coming up and trying to turn your microphone on? It's not turning on my end, so you might have to click it on your screen for me. Now try it one more time for me. I saw it flash on then flash off. Try one more click. There it is. We got you now.
There we go. Hi. Somebody have a question?
Yes. How did it feel to be at the top of the mountain after all the planning and practice?
Can you get closer to the microphone? I couldn't quite hear you.
How did it feel at the top of the mountain after all the planning and the practice?
Well, you're going to have to talk to another team member that's probably going to be getting on later in the week that got up to the balcony at 8,400 meters, which was the highest our expedition reached. Mount Everest is very difficult to climb, and there's a lot of people that want to climb it. So our team actually didn't reach the very, very top, but all of the different teams reached high points. The highest point that I reached was about 6,000 meters on a peak nearby to Mount Everest called Pumori. And it was really satisfying just to get up to 6,000 meters, which is almost 20,000 feet. And it was really satisfying to be able to do that. So I can only imagine how amazing it felt for the people that got up to 8,400 meters. And then there were many expeditions whose sole purpose was to climb the mountain that did reach the summit this year. So there were about 300 climbers, including all the Sherpa workers and high altitude guides, that went up the mountain this year. So yes, it's I've done lots of other mountains, but I didn't get up to the top of Mount Everest.
All right, and I know that you guys made it to the balcony, but you did some pretty important work there. You had that weather station put there, and that's quite a feat. Bringing it there, working at that level, and installing that weather station at that
Which
height.
had never been done before, and that's giving us live information from that weather station and the 4 others that we have on Mount Everest and in the region.
All right, awesome. Well, we need to go to Alaska now. We need to visit Mrs. Carton's group. They're hanging out in the library. Let's get that microphone turned on.
I bet
How
they know
Alaska.
the layers close.
Yeah, when we saw your glacier lake, we were very familiar with that. I wrote it down.
How do you get chosen for the expedition?
And what was the most surprising?
And what was the most surprising? How do you get chosen for the expedition? Everyone who came with us was a world-renowned expert. So Alex and I both work at National Geographic. We are privileged enough to have jobs that keep us based at National Geographic headquarters unless we're out on expeditions or other travel. And we were actually responsible for picking the people who went on the expedition, which was a privilege and really hard work. We would have loved to send, absolutely every amazing scientist into the field with us to collect the best possible data. We had to keep our team sort of small. We had to think about making sure the different teams could work together, that we were capturing all of the information that we could to the best of our ability. So we made sure we had teams from biology, glaciology, geology, meteorology, and mapping, all who could work together and really help us achieve our goal of understanding what climate change is doing on Mount Everest. So if you want to be chosen for an expedition like this, as I said earlier, an awful lot of schooling. You need to really get a PhD and be working on a science, and then focus on a location that is really exciting to you, which for all of our team members happen to be high mountains in Asia.
And the other part of our team, of course, were the people that helped the scientists do their work. So we picked expert climbers from the United States, 2 of them, Conrad Anker and Pete Athens. And the 2 of them helped us find the best climbers in the Khumbu region of Nepal, the Sherpa climbing team that helped us do all of our work. And so we had a Sirdar, who's the leader of the climbing team, named Panuru, who's from a village in the Khumbu called Fortse. And then he picked his best climbing team to help us install the weather station and do the work high up on the mountain.
And then the second part of the question was, what surprised us? I was just surprised when I was thinking back about injuries that we didn't even have a sprained ankle or any kind of injury, which we're very, very lucky about. So that's something that was surprising to me, how safe the team was.
Although if you got even a very little tiny cut on your finger when you were at base camp working like I was, it took the longest time to heal just a cut on your finger. But one of the most surprising things to me was how efficient base camp was. So all the garbage at base camp and all the human waste gets taken away from base camp and brought down to lower elevations for proper disposal. So I was really impressed with how this little city at base camp works very efficiently. They even had internet access provided by a company at base camp.
And they take it down every year and put it back up every spring. So they basically make a city every single year.
Yeah. So those 1,200 people and probably about 2,000 tents, they're all gone by the middle of June. That's all taken back down, and they put it all back up in the beginning of April. So it's a whole city down.
That's awesome. Well, talking about that kind of infrastructure at base camp brings us to a question coming in on YouTube. So there's some 3rd and 5th graders in New Jersey, and they've got a 2-part question for you. They wondered what you did when you saw an avalanche coming, and they're also very curious about going to the bathroom at base camp. How was that different than maybe how you would at work at Nat Geo headquarters?
Well, so the avalanches, you definitely want to keep a heads up. It's very important to avoid areas that are likely to avalanche. So where that avalanche that I showed in the video, where that came down, we never walked right under that ice cliff because we were afraid that it might come down anytime. So you have to be very smart about where you travel and avoid areas that are likely to have an avalanche. If one happens, you can try to run away from it, or if it's not going to reach you, then you're pretty safe. But it's really important to travel and set up your camps in places that are not likely to be hit. That's the most important thing, because an avalanche travels faster than you can run. So you can't outrun it, but you can avoid it. That's the best way.
For the bathroom, Alex was talking about all the different tents at base camp, and we actually had a little tent that was a little toilet tent. So just kind of like a porta potty that you would see at a concert or a fair. It was a little tiny tent that
has a blue barrel.
Yeah.
So it has a blue barrel with a seat. And so all the waste goes into the blue barrel, and then they put a top on it, and it gets carried out from base camp. So all those blue barrels going down the trail, you know that that's waste leaving base camp to be disposed of lower down where it's much better to be disposing of the waste. But every now and then you'd see either a yak train with blue barrels, or some of the porters would actually be carrying the blue barrels very carefully sealed down from base camp.
All right. Well, it doesn't seem to matter who we're hosting, whether it's an ocean explorer in the middle of the ocean or an astronaut. People are always curious about that part of the business. So thank you for helping us out with that today. So we're not going to be able to visit every classroom, but we can probably squeeze in 1 or 2 more classrooms before our event wraps today. So let me see some hands if I need to come back to your classroom if you guys have a burning question that we need to make sure we get in. So let's see. Let's go to Mrs. Wedman's class. I'm going to turn your microphone on. We're ready for you.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you. You read that one?
Has any type 1 diabetics ever climbed Mount Everest?
Did you hear that okay?
Could you repeat it?
Has any type 1 diabetic ever climbed Mount Everest?
I don't know. I would have to look that up, but my guess is that the answer is probably yes. If you have the right support team to help you on Everest, I would think that that would be something that's probably already been done. I know some of the people that have made it up Mount Everest, there was a blind climber. So again, it's just having the right support team, just like our scientists needed support from their Sherpa team to do the work that we were doing. So every climber who isn't a professional climber that goes on Mount Everest has a support team. And that should work for just about anybody who wants to be able to go up there. You have to be able to walk a lot of miles. That's the biggest requirement. A lot of steep miles uphill.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. And let's see, one more classroom. Let's go to Mrs. Russett's group. I'm going to turn your microphone on. There we go.
I was gonna go shortly, so if you hear it, we'll try to.
Hi.
What was the most valuable equipment that you used?
Wow.
Oh, do you mean which was the most important or which cost the most money?
Which was the most important?
The most important. Okay, that's harder.
We can answer both.
Which was the most important?
So I'd mention 3 different things that were very, very important as far as equipment goes. So having a weather station that can work in very extreme environments, that was really important equipment. We had to design the weather station so it could survive at 8,000 meters with big winds, very cold temperatures. We have a solar panel that powers the weather station, and the weather station transmits information through satellite link to us here in Washington, D.C. So I'd say that's the most valuable equipment. I also say that the ice core equipment was very valuable so that we could take an ice core at 8,000 meters. And then from a mapping standpoint, and I love maps, and maps is what I do, we had a LiDAR data collector, and LiDAR sends a beam of light and measures the distance to things. And we had that mounted to a helicopter. And that was the most expensive piece of equipment we had. That was about $1 million piece of equipment. So those 3 things are very important for us from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, I think our other most important pieces of equipment were all around safety. So we had avalanche beacons that in case there was an avalanche and someone was stuck, we'd be able to find them and rescue them. We had satellite phones because cell phone reception is not very good. So we wanted to make sure we could always communicate with each of the teams. And those pieces of equipment are much cheaper than our scientific equipment, but they were critically important to make sure our teams could be safe and do their work.
All right. Well, as we get close to wrapping up the event, I want to remind the classrooms that if you're tuning in via YouTube or on camera with us and you took any pictures, please post them on Twitter, #ExploreClassroom, and tag @NatGeo Education. I want to remind the classrooms that if you want to get more involved with the work that happened on Everest, your classes can check out Nat Geo Education Everest activities at natgeoed.org, and I can send that link to the teachers. Also, the live data from the weather station, you can check that out at any time at natgeo.com/Everest. So definitely something that's pretty cool and worth checking out. As well as the week goes on, we have more events at 3 o'clock Eastern. We're connecting with some of the team who did some of the work on the glacier. So we're really excited to connect with them. And I do want to plug the event coming up on the 31st at 1 p.m. Eastern with the biology team. I know it's Halloween, but we have a few more spots for classrooms. So if you want to head over and sign up for that event, we'd love to see your classrooms joining us for that. So Alex and Aurora, thank you so much. That was a ton of fun. You guys had obviously an amazing, awesome experience. And yeah, it was a lot of fun chatting with you today.
All right, thank you.
All right, so the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna turn all the microphones on, but before we do, our class in Alaska, they love to get a picture with the speakers. So can you guys hold on for a minute after we go off air? And they're gonna do like a selfie with you up against the screen, and they'll post that to social media.
Sure.
All right, so boys and girls, nice and loud, microphones are coming on, let's go. Awesome job. You guys never let us down. We're excited to see you joining us throughout the week for more events, and hopefully we see some in your classrooms at 3 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, everyone.